to Books in the World, a presentation of the Cape Cod Writers Center. Today's program features a book called The House on Crooked Road that actually exists in Falmouth.
Crooked Pond.
Pardon? Crooked Pond. I'm sorry, I've got the wrong road here. Let me say again, The House on Crooked Pond,
Yes.
which actually exists in Falmouth. And the person who is responsible for writing this book is sitting right here, Marianne Shafer. Welcome to the program, Marianne.
Thank you, Bob. I'm glad to be here.
The house, now, Crooked Pond, that we figured out, actually exists in Falmouth.
Right.
The house on Crooked Pond is the basis of your story.
Right.
Is the picture on the cover an actual house in Falmouth?
No. And actually, the house on Crooked Pond that the story revolves around is not real. That's all imagination. I mean,
okay.
But the
Crooked
picture,
Pond is real.
Crooked Pond is real, but the house is my imagination. But that picture is very similar to the Hoxie house up in Sandwich.
Oh.
It's a half salt box, they call
Okay,
it.
so the pictured house here actually exists, but not on Crooked Pond.
Not on Crooked Pond, right. Neither do the people who live in the house on Crooked Pond really exist.
Now, your book, Marianne, covers 303 years or so from the 1700s all the way up to 2014.
Right.
But the house is the major portion of the book in the people who have lived in it through all of that time. It's sort of like any, I guess, let me rephrase the question, Marianne.
Mm-hmm.
Are there houses on Cape Cod that are family houses where people in the family have actually lived generation and generation all these years?
I believe there are some. I don't really know which ones, which families lived in which houses and for how long. But my fictitious Lyman family built the house in 1685.
This is the house in your story?
Yes, the house in the story. And they lived there, and my story takes place in 1712, and then the same family in 1814, then the same family, not the same people, of course, they're descendants, in 1912 and present, so-called present 2014.
All right, so you've got a 300-year span in there.
Yes.
Which gives you a lot of play for the kind of people who live there.
Right.
What sort of people did you create to fit in all those years?
Well, the people are, the characters of the story are really the most important part to me. And they all belong to the same Lyman family.
The Lymans.
Lymans, yes. And I wanted them to have problems that they would solve according to their time and place in history. However, the problems that they had are totally universal and timeless. So, like being a liar, being intimidated.
All right, one of the characters is a liar. One of the characters is very intimidating.
Or intimidated. I'll leave that up to the reader to find out.
All right.
And then, of course, let's see, betrayal takes place.
Oh. Uh-huh.
And so one is betrayed, and some are betrayers. And let's see, lies, intimidation, betrayal, and revenge. So those are the main
just a typical family.
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh. How much of it is family? I mean, it's all family related, but geologically.
Genealogically.
Genealogically, where do you bring these characters from?
Oh dear, are you saying, is this my family?
well, no, it could be any family.
Yes, I know. Yeah, I actually made out an entire family tree, starting with 1685, and decided to name people and say when they were born, who they married, and who their children were, and it goes all the way through to 2014. But I thought of putting that in the book, But then I thought, no, then you're going to know if someone does get married to so-and-so or if they don't get married to so-and-so, because I didn't want to put a family tree in the book. But it is one family that connects.
And as the years go by, other people occupy this particular house on Crooked Pond.
But they're all the same family.
They're all the same family.
All descendants of the same.
Yeah. You've got some really nasty characters in there.
Good.
Discarding characters, mean characters, friendly characters. And it all starts with the modern portion of the family.
Right.
And then it drifts back in groups of 100 years. I'm looking at the chart here. You've got 2014 that starts the book.
Right.
And then you jump back suddenly 300 years.
Yes. I wanted to, I didn't want to go totally chronologically, and I didn't want to skip back and forth, because I don't like to read books that go back and forth and back and forth. But I wanted to just start out to set the setting. And the journalist, Abby Jenkins, goes into the Lyman house to interview.
Or the modern heroine
modern
of
day,
the story
2014, right?
Worked for a Cape Cod newspaper.
Yes, it's called the Cape Cod Evening Star. Totally made up, having
right.
nothing to do with
Only the names have been changed.
to protect the innocent.
And a fellow who comes into her life
is John Linton, and he is has been actor, and he's living in the house. The house was sold to a man by the name of David Norman, and then John Linton happened to know David Norman, and so he's living in the house, and he's been hiding out because he has a past he doesn't want to think about. So no one knows that the great, once famous actor, John Linton, is there. So he's keeping it very secret, and he wants her to come and interview him, and he'll finally show off his collection of war memorabilia.
He's not talking about his family, but he's talking about...
No, he's talking about the house right now, because the house was sold.
But he wants to have this woman, the reporter,
Yes.
write up a collection of war materials that he's got.
Yes, he's got this huge collection.
All right, but he has a different scheme in mind.
Yes, which I don't want to tell. Do you think I should tell the scheme?
Well, it's the beginning of the book, so
we won't tell it right now. She has no idea what she's in for, we'll say that.
Oh, yes.
Abby has no idea.
But she's in for it.
But she's in for it, big. She's in for it big.
And she finds that her life is about to change.
Yes.
We're being very careful here so we don't give away your whole story. I know. And then after you establish this particular incident, you drop back in your storytelling, it's fiction, to 300 years back to the house.
Yes.
And what sort of people were living there then? We're going back to the 1700s.
Okay. In 1712, the people who were living there was a man called Jabez Lyman.
Same family.
Same family, yes. He had come over from England, and in 1685, he and a couple of his brothers or cousins or something built the house on Crooked Pond, and then they went back to live back in Boston again. But the reason Jabez came to build the house on Crooked Pond was because he was terribly disfigured. There was a great fire in Boston, and he was terribly disfigured, and he lost the use of one eye. So he has a patch over one eye, and he's got this terrible, burned skin. So he came because he just wanted to hide and be in the woods. So he built this. Of course, everything was isolated then, but it's still an isolated place. He wanted to be alone. But then what he needs to have, his older son Edmund drove a new herd of sheep down from Plymouth, and he needs to have the sheep looked after and checked out by a farrier. And that's where the farrier's daughter goes with her father, the blacksmith. They ride up the hill in a wagon, and they go to check out his sheep.
Now you've made all this up.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. There is a blacksmith shop in West Falmouth where the Quakers settled and where the Quakers live.
You're taking tiny little bits of actuality,
right,
and creating this whole family around
right,
them.
Right.
And the whole storyline from one blacksmith shop
yes.
to one old house to the Crooked Pond, which actually does exist, to a lot of characters that are all in your mind.
Yes. And I've given them names that are common names on Cape Cod because they have nothing to do with the real people here. But I just thought if you're on Cape Cod and you're interested in Cape Cod, you'll see these names around. I mean, like Swift and Crowell, all kinds of different names that are still on Cape Cod, but there's no resemblance. And I make that very clear in the very beginning of the book. That
Well, Marianne Shafer, did you go back historically in papers and books to find names of that time?
Yes, Tacy. Tacy Swift, the farrier's daughter, is the Quaker. And so I looked up early Quaker names for women. And I saw the name Tacy, and I thought, now that's interesting.
It's not Casey.
It's not Casey, it's T-A-C-Y. It's like Stacy without the S. Tacy.
Uh-huh.
And I even said how to pronounce it in the book because I don't want people to call her Tassie.
Even though she's fictional, you want her named correctly.
She may be fictional to you, but to me she's very real.
All right. And one of your century jumps in the story, Marianne, you go from the 1700s to the
1814.
To the War of 1812.
Right.
Again, did you find names for that period?
The story takes place in Falmouth, or they call it Hatchville, or Herringville, they call it, where the house is, near Falmouth. Now, in the War of 1812, in January of 1814, the Nimrod was this wonderful British ship right off the coast of Falmouth, and they gave a warning. They wanted to capture the cannon that the Falmouth militia had on their
This is factual.
This is factual, yes. And so they gave them 2 hours, and they said, give us your cannon, or we're going to bombard the town.
Wow.
So what they did, the town people moved everybody north of Main Street because anything past Main Street wasn't going to be bombarded, couldn't be bombarded. But they also said, there was a Captain Jenkins who said, if you want our cannon, come and take them or come and get them or something like that. So they moved everybody out of town, and then the British started to bombard the houses along the shore. But in my story, a part of the Lyman family lived on Shore Street in Falmouth in a little half house, half cape. And their house was bombarded.
And they have the cannonball.
They had the cannonball come in and roll over the matriarch's foot. And they had to move the house. They decided this is not good living here by the shore. We'll move and we'll connect to the old house, the Lyman house on Crooked Pond. So they moved that house with teams and teams of oxen through the woods, and there were roads and everything, and they went to attach it to the house on Crooked Pond. But the matriarch, Olivia Lyman, actually she always went by the name Olivia Lyman. She said, I am not going to live with those Lymans. We've been separated from them for 100 years, and we're not going to move in with them. But she gets moved in.
I admire the way you take factual happenings of history and suddenly they're part of a fictional story.
Well, that's the fun of it all.
Have you written much, Marianne?
I did. I started 2 novels about, years ago, but I didn't know anything about writing then. I mean, I knew how to write, but I didn't know anything about publishing, and I gave up both of them just because I got involved in raising children and doing things like that. But one was going to be, I was always fascinated with the Indians out west, and one was going to be taking place out west. And a family goes on a sailing ship, and they go around the Horn, and they land in Arizona, finally, California and Arizona. And they build a house called Casa Grande, which I found is just so many, there's so many Casa Grandes.
It sounds wonderful.
Yeah. And then their dealings with the Indians there, because I really love the the American, Native American culture.
But we're jumping from Arizona.
Yes, let's get back here into
back to Crooked Pond. All right. And again, you do a 100-year jump from the War of 1812. You get into the early 1900s.
Right.
What were those people like?
Well,
fictional, but what were they like?
Okay, here you have Daniel Lyman.
Daniel.
And Daniel was always really, really teased and tortured and belittled by his older brother, Charles.
As children.
As children, and even in their teenage years and everything. So Daniel tried to run away from home once, and he went to Boston, but he found there were evil people there too. So he came back home, and he waited until he was 18. Now the reason this is important is that the Old Colony Railroad had stopped at Monument Beach until I think it was 72, and because there was a guano factory in Woods Hole where they would pick up the bird droppings from the Pacific, ship it back to Woods Hole and refine it, make it into fertilizer. And then put the fertilizer in bags and then ship it again. But it was such a big business in Woods Hole. In the late 1889, I think they shut down. But it was such a big business that they thought the railroad should come through here. And then they could put their bags of fertilizer on the railroad, on the train. So if that train hadn't happened, Daniel would not have been able to walk to the West Falmouth station.
And again, you're taking real things that
Yes.
did happen and
Yes.
bringing your fictional characters into the
Right,
story.
right. So Daniel gets on the train and goes west to the Klondike and strikes a real fortune in gold. And then he decides he's going to come back and he's going to really exact vengeance on his brother Charles. But he's going to do it in a very gentlemanly way, because now he was a gentleman. He was wealthy. He stayed in New York for a while and met this socialite and married her. And he was going to come back and take over the house from buy it from his father. And then what he's going to do was build a wonderful wine cellar in the basement. And he knew his brother loved wine and that his brother would be insanely jealous. So we thought, what a gentlemanly way to...
So Daniel is still mad at Charlie for badgering him as a youngster.
Well, he wasn't. He kind of had forgotten it. But then when he came home, Charles was still at it. So he thought, what, I mean, I thought I'd do something, but now I've got to do something really, that'll really get him.
I have to wonder what happens in your real life to find all these characters.
None of these things. Although my great-grandmother, Mary Lyman, Lockwood, is kind of a physical role model for the matriarch in 1814. She's tall and thin and short curly hair and always just very absolutely proper. And things should be just so, that kind of thing. So that's the matriarch.
You just made me sit up straight.
I know, me too.
The characters are very much alive in their family.
Yeah.
And all the family, pettiness, love, all the extremes, all the different directions. You've got a character for just about every single one of them.
Well, that's what family life is all about.
And, it's family life.
Yeah.
But the house.
House.
They're all at the house.
Mm-hmm.
Have you done any research into some of the houses that are still around that have this family connection?
Oh, yes. In fact, one of the things I'm working on, my blog, is historic half houses of Cape Cod.
Half houses?
They're half houses. All right. Now, a half Cape would be one of those Cape Cod houses. There's a door and then two windows to one side. A full Cape would have a door with two windows on either side.
A window on each side,
Two
door
windows.
in the center.
Door in the center. That's a full Cape. And same thing with a salt box. A half salt box would be a door, two windows, another story, and then an attic and a steep slope coming down.
Yes, it comes up short on one end and then a
way
long
down. Yeah.
slope on the
It's
other.
2.5 stories on the front, and then the back goes down to one story. Very sharply.
And the salt box is on the cover of your book.
Yes. And the salt box was actually named after the salt box style house, was named after actual salt boxes. In Falmouth and all around the Cape, they had these salt evaporation vats, and they would pump water from the salt water from the sea into these huge vats, about 10 feet square, 15 feet square, and they would let the water sit there, and it would evaporate in the sunshine. And if it were to rain, they had these rolling roofs that would roll back and cover and protect the salt, because it's supposed to be drying out, not getting wet again. In fact, there are a couple of those up in the Aptuxet Trading Post up in Bourne, and you can see some salt evaporation vats. They're not working.
Are they still evaporating salt?
No.
Just the shell
Yeah.
of the was there.
Right. But once the water had evaporated, the men would shovel out these, shovelfuls of salt and put them in boxes to be transported, back to wherever they had to go, where people who needed salt on Cape Cod because you have all these fish. And the boxes that they would shovel the salt into were shaped like this on one side and then down like that, so that if it were to rain while they were transporting it, the rain would run
Oh.
off.
So they kept the salt box shape in transit.
Yes, yes.
Are there any other industries of the Cape that you incorporated into your
Well, the
book?
guano, the fertilizer from the bird droppings in the Pacific. I mean, that's what brought the railroad. That's what some people say brought the railroad farther south.
There are fascinating backgrounds to some of these stories, aren't there?
Yes, yes. In fact, I thought of doing a talk and calling it "A Quaker, a Cannonball, and a Shipload of Guano."
I think it's a fascinating. People will look at that title and say, "What?
What?
What?" These people well, I don't want to give too much of the story away, but a couple of them are rather nefarious characters. I'm thinking of Daniel, who
Yeah, he was.
you created a monster.
Yes.
As you write, do you think of him as a mean person?
No, because I think that even the meanest of people, although I don't know any people who are like totally terribly mean, but most people have a good side to them. And
I would like to think so.
So Daniel has a good side to him too. And he's trying to please his socialite wife, Nell, and trying to be gentlemanly and mind his manners and all this, but then he has this rage inside of him that is very hard for him to control, and he's trying to control it all the while he's being a gentleman, but then Charles pushes him a little bit too far, and then he pushes Charles a little too far.
As the author, as you're writing the stories of Daniel, does he speak to you?
They all do.
They all do.
In fact, okay, here's what I was thinking. Okay, I'm going to put my book in the back of my car. I've got a van, let's say. Put my book in the trunk, and I'm going to drive to Florida. Now, as I'm not even 10 minutes down the road, when all the characters come alive and sit in the van with me, and now you've got characters interacting from 1712, 1814, and they don't know each other. They've heard of their relatives, but they're all related. And they got in the car and they started, like Abigail and Stan from 2014 want to take William and Harry from 1814 to see Disneyland, because William and Harry are two little boys.
Have you reached the point, Marianne, where one of the characters in your mind comes out with a storyline or a plot line where you've had to go back and rewrite something?
Absolutely, absolutely. They take over. In fact, they say writer's block is when your imaginary characters will no longer talk to you.
That's very interesting, yeah.
Yes.
You do another thing in your book, The House on Crooked Pond, Marianne Shafer, where as you jump centuries, you write a sort of a preview or a little...
just to tie them together so that you know a little bit about what happened to the characters in 1712 and how they were related. I go through like a little family thing. So-and-so was married and they had 3 children and then their children and children, and that's how someone else came up.
All right. Would you honor us with a sort of a reading of some of that intro that you've created for your book?
Do you want the quotes or do you want an interim?
Well, you do I don't know, a half page or maybe a long paragraph before you jump centuries.
Okay, yes. Let me see where we are.
If you have one handy.
Sure. Here we go. This is just before part 3, the matriarch. Now, we've just gone through 1712 and learned about Tacy Swift, the Quaker girl, and what happened to her.
And now we're jumping to 1814?
Now we're going to 1814, the summer of 1814. So the tie-in, since 1690, when Jabez's brother Charles had moved back to Boston after helping build the house on Crooked Pond, the two families had kept little contact with each other. As Charles's fortune in the shipping industry grew, He became involved with the best of families in Boston and would not dream of inviting those relatives who were farmers of Cape Cod to their gala events. But Charles agreed to take on his nephew Thomas, the younger son of Jabez, as a seaman apprentice to work on his great fleet of ships that sailed around the world. And while Thomas was away, Edmund financed the construction of a small house for Thomas on Shore Street, close to the town landing. In 1715, Thomas returned to the Cape, forever banned, from the house on Crooked Pond. He moved into the half cape his brother had built for him on Shore Street. And soon after, he married Hannah Thatcher. Thatcher's another Cape Cod name, even though he knew his heart lay elsewhere. And just as Charles in Boston had not wanted to communicate with those Lymans on Crooked Pond, so Edmund on Crooked Pond insisted that his family would never again communicate with those on Shore Street.
It's sort of like a narrator, as you have
Yes,
just narrated.
yes, I've done a little narrating.
In a motion picture, for example, you have a voiceover that just...
Yeah, a little bit of that is there, yeah.
And then, boom, the next century of Lymans comes to life.
Right.
In the houses, the house on Crooked Pond and some of the other home stories, there are certain rooms. I mentioned the keeping room. The keeping room.
That was like the major room. It was like a kitchen. There was always the big fireplace for cooking, and that was the major room. And if the house was a small half cape, it would just have a keeping room, and everything would go on there. Kids might sleep up in the attic, but there'd be a bed and
would this be the
kitchen,
living room today?
Like a living room today, but it was all in one house. It was like one room in the house. And then there'd be, off to one side, there'd be a borning room where children were born.
A borning room?
A little tiny room, just where women would give birth. It was usually near the fireplace, near the chimney, I should say, where the bricks would be warm on her side. So if she was giving birth in the winter.
And the great room?
And the great room, then if you doubled the size of your house, you would have a keeping room and a great room, which was the formal parlor.
All right, well, we've rebuilt the house, and the house we're talking about today is the house on Crooked Pond by our guest, Marianne Shafer.
And it's ML.
Pardon?
It's ML here.
Oh, yeah. Yes, if you're looking for the book, it's ML, initials.
Right.
But Marianne, thank you very much for being our guest today.
Thank you, Bob.
And for creating 4 centuries overall of characters that lead very interesting lives, and they're all in the same family.
Yes.
I'm going to go look up my family tree and start making notes.
You better watch out. You don't know what you're going to find.
Thank you for coming in today
Thank
for
you,
Books
Bob.
in the World, Marianne.
I've certainly enjoyed it.
Thank you very much for looking in on today's episode of Books in the World. Our book today called The House on Crooked Pond by our guest Marianne Shafer. M.L. Shafer is the name of the book in case you're looking for it. And we'll look forward to your joining us next time on Books and the World. Thank you.
Okay, that's got to be perfect.